Just final message.
Thank you to everyone who is joining us both in person and virtually. We're glad you could make it. Times have changed in the computer world. If we think of way back, a computer was something you saw on TV on a science fiction show. And a window was something you looked through and cleaned every once in a while. A ram was the father of a goat. So we've come a long way, and we're happy that we're able to bring you here either in person or virtually. And of course, with virtual, sometimes things happen, and that megabytes, and that's the end of my corny puns. But I'm sure that will all go well with the technology experts we have in our division. So I'd like to first of all begin in a more serious manner, and I'd like to start by doing our land acknowledgement. The Riel School Division brings together a community of schools on the traditional lands of the Nabik, Inawak, and Dakota. Our division is located on the homeland of the Métis. We recognize that Manitoba is also the homeland of the Anishinaabe and the Dene. We respect the treaties made on this land and acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past and present. We dedicate ourselves to authentic alliances with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and cooperation. Our motto is thriving learners and flourishing communities. Our vision is for all members of our community to excel as caring, confident, capable, and resilient lifelong learners who contribute to a democratic and sustainable world. Our mission is to provide a safe, inclusive, and engaging environment where personal and collective learning are valued and each one of us reaches our full potential. Our multi-year strategic plan for 2019 to 2023 includes belonging, mastery, independence, and generosity. Right now, and an error right to start with, because I forgot to introduce myself, I'm Josie Landry, and I'm a trustee in Board 4, one of the trustees in Board 4, and I was the chair of the planning committee for this event, along with Trustee Pam Kolachuk and Trustee Cindy Turner. Now I'd like to call upon our board chair, Louise Johnston, to bring.
Well, I'm used to them lowering the podium because I'm short, but this is over. Good evening, everybody. I have to say how exciting it is to have some of you here attending in person, and certainly those of you joining us virtually. It is truly a great pleasure to be here as a community and learn together. Let me first begin by making a few introductions. I need to introduce the Board of Trustees. I have some here live in person. I have Trustee Robert Page, Trustee Tom Parker, Trustee Pam Kolachuk, and of course Josie has introduced herself, and Trustee Sandy Nemeth at the back of the room. Joining virtually, I have Trustee Sigurdsson, Trustee Neil Vadabonker, and Trustee Cindy Turner. Myself, of course, you know, I'm Louise Johnston. Last year, we got together as a community. We held a lot of town halls, and we talked a lot about education, the importance in this community as Riel, as we went up against Bill 64. And we talked about the need for us to rally together and learn together. So tonight we begin another important community conversation around the importance of our diversity, equity, and inclusion policy and work that we are doing here in our community. We are so very fortunate to have incredibly talented staff that are going to help educate us and allow us to learn together and ideally become a stronger, healthier, more open and inclusive community. So with that, I offer my thanks to the staff that have given up so much time to make this possible for this evening. And certainly the other people I also wanted to introduce is our Superintendent of Schools, Christian Michalik. And I think we had Jamie here. He's gone. Jamie Rudnicki was here a minute ago, our Secretary Treasurer, and behind we have Mr. Clark Hagan, our IT So here we are, and the rest of you are going to get introduced as the goes through and as it's time for your presentation. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Josie, and once again, thank you for being here.
Thank you, Trustee Johnston. Okay, I'd like to now introduce the members of the Riel School Division's Indigenous Education Team. Bobby Joe Leclerc, who is a Divisional Vice Principal, Manny Ski, Joelle Tetreault, and Sean Oliver, who will be doing a presentation on decolonizing education. So I welcome you all of them.
Anse, Pimoteo noten mesfeo netisanazan. Okamal kawichi Pimote netisanazan. Paskani dodam, Maigani dodam, Mapinigis. Wanero First Nations Nidoji. Good evening, everyone. My name is Bobby Joe Leclerc, and I'm the Vice Principal of Indigenous Education. I want to thank you for having us here tonight. This past year, the Indigenous Education team has been given the opportunity and space to reimagine education. This was based on a need to continue to expand and improve equity-based outcome data collection and analysis for Indigenous students and to address issues of systemic racism in a proactive and capacity building and systemic way. As one of the operating goals within the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism Initiative is to develop and implement a multi-year equity-based professional learning plan focused on anti-racism, anti-oppression education, trauma-informed practice, and the Truth and Reconciliation call to action. The Indigenous Education team has been working with senior leadership, the leadership teams, and the leadership teams in building capacity with all LRSD stakeholders so that we as an entire system can colonize education together. Within the circle of Indigenous education, we have two teams. The Anishinaabe Moan language and culture team consists of Kelsey Lanahan, who is lead teacher, Hilda Kent, Linda Allen, Rebecca Mandamin, Debbie Neufeld, and Darlene Tomsick. The Anishinaabe Moan language team supports teachers and students in kindergarten and grade 1 with acquisition and development of Anishinaabe Moan language. Through language, they are embedding Indigenous traditional knowledge, cultural practices, beliefs, oral tradition, and values. The language team works alongside the cultural integration specialists and learning team to build capacity with teachers in implementing topics related to language, curriculum, and the 7 teachings. This year, they will complete the grade 1 curriculum and begin the development of grade 2 curriculum. Also within our circle, we have the Indigenous Education Support Team, which consists of Manny Ski, Joelle Tetreault, Sean Oliver, Rosemary Bird, Billy Joe Cross, and Lorraine Bichuk. The Indigenous Education support teachers focus on supporting and providing rich learning opportunities for senior leadership, school leaders, teachers, and students that deepen understandings of Indigenous peoples, worldviews, practices, histories, colonialism, and inequities within the system. With that, I'm going to invite Sean Oliver to talk about some of the professional learning we've done this year.
Thank you for being with us today. My name is Sean Oliver. I'm Red River Métis from Winnipeg, Manitoba. The name that I carry is Wapsikiakahio. I support the Glenlawn family of schools, and I've been an Indigenous education teacher in LRSD for 10 years. I'll be sharing with you a bit more about our team's work in regards to professional learning in Indigenous education. Bobby Joe talked about our team feeling grateful for being given the space to lead some of the work in our division around decolonizing education. It has been made clear that this is a top priority in LRSD, and that despite recent challenges, it remains our responsibility to move together to ensure our schools are safe places for all students to learn and grow. We, along with the senior leadership team, feel that one of the most important ways to support the LRSD community in doing that work together is by first providing those in leadership positions with authentic, meaningful, and ongoing professional development opportunities. That's why we're grateful to have a senior leadership team who has been fully committed to doing the work required to make real change possible, and who has been willing to model what that commitment to learning looks like. Now more than ever, we're having conversations that address the impacts of racism, systemic discrimination, and colonization. And our senior leadership team has demonstrated a willingness to be discomforted and a sense of urgency to have difficult conversations where they have not had before. In each of the professional development opportunities we have created this year, our intention has been to deliver anti-oppressive, anti-racist learning through an Indigenous lens. This means moving away from a cultural awareness-based approach to learning to that of acknowledging the ongoing harms of colonialism, racism, and systemic discrimination towards Indigenous peoples. In our Métis walking tour, we tell the story of the dispossession of the Métis homeland and nation, making direct connections to the inequities faced by our people today. In the Circle in the Box activity, we work to juxtapose worldviews on community and relationship and use our new understandings to imagine how they impact our work every day in our school communities. In the blanket activity, we provide an experience-based approach to learning about the dispossession of Indigenous lands and tell a true and comprehensive history of Canada through Indigenous perspectives. Again, with a focus on how what we learn relates to the inequities our peoples face each and every day. And finally, in our land and treaty acknowledgement session, we offer learning around the first steps in understanding the current relationships between Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and how to begin to take an anti-oppressive, anti-racist approach in the work that we do together. Thanks for your time.
Good evening. My name is Joy Pedro. I'm a Red River Métis and currently live in St. Boniface and am an Indigenous Education support teacher. I'm here to talk about what we do and how we help teachers integrate Indigenous perspectives. You'll see there's a long list of things, but I won't go into everything. We don't have enough time to tell you everything that we do with teachers. But unbeknownst to teachers have been taught and educated in the colonial school system and society. This system purposely ignored Indigenous history, worldviews, and the devastating effects of colonialism. Working with teachers, though, it is clear that they are willing to change their approaches and strategies, but many are intimidated and scared of making mistakes, which is natural. In their lives, our main goal as a team, we want to educate, support, reassure, and guide teachers so they are ready and willing to engage the decolonization process. Without them, the system will never change because we know teachers are the most important influence for students. So I'm going to talk about a couple of initiatives that we've done. We have 2 pages of ways we support teachers, but I want to talk about what we did today. Today, I sat down with a couple of colleagues and worked at Frontenac School with grade 7 and 8 teachers. And they're working on a project-based project. So they want to know how they can integrate water in the sciences and in the social studies curriculum with a project based on water. So we were there working with them and making sure that they understand what is the worldview for water in Indigenous cultures, and for them to be able to teach better and to have that confidence to reach students. Another example of that is, like Sean was talking about, the Métis walking tour. One of the main issues right now is that we want to get the kids out of the classroom and onto the land. This Métis walking tour is a 3-hour walking tour of the Forks, St. Boniface, and Upper Fort Garry. And kids get a sense of history through an anti-oppressive and anti-racist lens. So that's really important. And I'd like to conclude by saying I'm so grateful to work for a school division that gives space to Indigenous perspectives and wants to decolonize the school system and society. So I'm proud and I'm grateful. Thank you very much.
When we're looking at decolonizing the system, the system structures are important to address. Senior leadership, as Bobby Joe started with, talking about how we influence and how we help with teachers is of course important. But what are we doing for students? Some of the things that we're doing for students are giving them space to talk about things. And I'm getting ahead of myself. We're missing a slide and I got off a little bit off here.
I'll get it back up.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm going to introduce myself. Bianak Indigenous Name Etutem Wajashkonigam Nuji. And as all of us introduce ourselves, my name is Manny Ski. I'm from a community close to Kenora called Rat Portage. We are reclaiming our traditional names in that area. So oftentimes, if anybody's traveling out to that area, you'll notice these signs telling you that you're next to a community that are about this long and have I don't know, 25 vowels and a bunch of consonants in it. And so communities are reclaiming that language, and I think it's important. And I don't know if everybody that came up introduced themselves in a traditional language. It's something as a group we are trying to encourage by taking the spaces and doing it and living it. My traditional tongue is not natural to me. I didn't grow up in a home where my language was spoken, but I think reclaiming that in spaces where education is important, it's an important leadership thing for every adult to do in those spaces, so that kids can also follow that space. Back to where I was going. Looking at structures and decolonizing education is important, that we have opportunities to educate educators. But working its way down, how are we impacting students? One of the things that we do as a group is we offer space. And so we give space to students in Indigenous youth leadership. It's a group that meets once a month. And it is a space for Indigenous students. It's a safe space where we can talk about reclaiming language, where we can talk about reclaiming history, where we give students a space to immerse themselves in who they are. Acknowledging how we got here is really important. We got here because our data just doesn't reflect who we are as a community. And I've heard this repeated over and over from different presenters as they've come up so far this evening. Community and learners. And it's important that our community is reflected by the data that we're collecting, and it hasn't yet. And so because of some of that data, we've been given the space this year to do some of the things. And as some of my colleagues have alluded to, having that space to challenge the system is important, and it's gone contrary to some of the things that have been happening in the world. We've had a pandemic and teachers that were allowed to come together and to challenge the system, and it's not by happenstance, and it's by forward thinking and by people who are really willing to look at what we're doing and make some change. Our job is to give students that space. One of the things that one of the tools that we've used is a program called Minecraft, and I don't know how many in the room are familiar with Minecraft. But the division has collaborated with Microsoft, a multinational corporation, to develop a Minecraft game which is reflective of Indigenous community and this Indigenous community. We use that tool to go into classrooms as an entry point for students so that they can find success. Success is an important thing for students to find. When we can find success with students, they can achieve. We can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And so when data is reflecting poorly for a community, or for part of our community, it's reflected in how we're approaching students, and finding ways for students to find success within the classroom is really important. That program, the Manitowabi Key, which the division and a multinational corporation came together to make, allows students to access, Indigenous students to access things that are familiar to them. They understand traditional medicines, they understand some of the characters, they understand the place. It helps the non-Indigenous community to see the Indigenous community as not a flashpoint in history where trauma has occurred. We're not just residential school. We are more than that. Finding ways to enrich student experience is really, really important for us. Lastly, I think the story we tell about community is important. It's really, really important for us. What we teach in classrooms is important, and equipping all levels of our education system with the tools to talk about and to understand the Indigenous experience in this country is really, really important. And I think that's one of the things our group has been really good at.
I also want to take this opportunity to talk about some of the next steps in Indigenous education and also share some of the projects that we have had an opportunity to work on, not only on a divisional level, but also on a level and a national level. We are currently working in partnership with the National Film Board in developing Our Voices, Our Stories, which is a digital and immersive digital platform that addresses Indigenous histories and colonialism and tells a story from an Indigenous point of view. The Indigenous education support teachers and myself have been writers for 13 pathways that lead you to Indigenous education. And it's a really important project because it also addresses all the things we want people to know about Indigenous peoples in Canada, teachers and Canadians to learn about. And the project has been we have been working on the project for 4 years. And next year they're launching the first 3 pathways. So it's really, the work we're doing in LRC is really creating a foundation for Indigenous education across Canada that not only teachers and students can access, but all Canadians, and it's free. Again, we also, Manny talked about Manitoba Key, which has been an incredible project that we had an opportunity to partner with and to develop. And we're now starting to see how this game is used in classrooms to support Indigenous students so that they can talk about things that they know about in a very positive way. And although it was created to really work with early years, within the game and the development of the game, we added what we're called Easter eggs or things older students can really acknowledge. If you go into the area of Manitoba Key electoral forms, you'll see red dresses. So it gives educators an opportunity to have those conversations about the murder and missing girls. So throughout their game, there are different areas and starting points to discuss different areas of Indigenous education. We also talked about Indigenous youth leadership. Some of the things that we've done in youth leadership is to provide authentic opportunities for Indigenous to spend time with our knowledge keepers and our elders, and to be able to go out on the land to practice ceremony. Moving forward, we're talking about possibly creating a gas camp so students can really ground themselves in Indigenous ways of knowing and being. And whatever we do in Indigenous youth leadership always comes from the students. It's their ask and what they want. Our Council of Grandmothers and Grandfathers have been integral in that. They are from many of Manitoba's First Nations and Indigenous nations, and they support us. And it's really important to have a council like that because our kids come from many different nations. We need to hear that point of view and that worldview so that it doesn't become just one voice, but it's the voice of many. And they also provide feedback and advice to not only our team, but senior leadership, and they help guide us in the work that we're doing, which is really important in building authentic relationships with Indigenous communities. Because whatever we do in here, we could say that we discussed it with our Council of Grandmothers and Grandfathers, and they're the ones who guided us and led us through that. We have the image of education as our buffalo. So that is really our Indigenous education portal on the divisional website. And in that portal is, I'd like to say almost everything you know about Indigenous articles. It's all categorized. It's really all the things that you want to know at your fingertips for Indigenous education. The team has been working on that for the past 3 years. Anytime we get anything new happening in our community, articles, videos, we put that in there for our educators. We've also been working on Indigenous Education Learning Continuum, which we're hoping to launch. And that is learning about Indigenous perspectives across the curriculum. What do you want to, what can you teach and how do you teach starting in grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, 4? So we're hoping to be able to support educators with this learning continuum as well. We have this year, we've had an opportunity to partner with the National Film Board, the National Center of Truth and Reconciliation, and Every Child Matters in developing videos and lesson plans around land acknowledgements and treaties that support educators across Canada in having those conversations. And they're also available both in French and English. A lot of what we do in Indigenous education in the Riel School Division is available in 2 languages because we have an Indigenous team that has the ability to speak French and to develop some of the things in French, which is really quite a gift. Also up there you see Maui Mochikewen, and that's a Cree word, and that's what our team is called. It's those who come together to pray. At the beginning of this year, our entire team went up to Nelson House, Manitoba, and we spent 4 days with knowledge keepers and elders, learning about the change of life ceremony, so we can take some of what we learned up there and bring it back home. And while we're up there, we're gifted that name as a team who comes together to do the work in a good way. And like Manny had said, we are reclaiming some of our language. So as we go through this entire process, we're trying to use the language as much as we can. 2 years ago or 3 years ago, Indigenous youth leadership received their name, and it's Oyoyo Chik, which means those who are sounding the voice of their people. The children are the ones who are bringing forth that message about what they want to learn and are going to be the changes for future generations. So with that, I just really want to thank you and really give, like, I know my team has said it, but I really want to thank senior leadership and leadership for giving us this opportunity to have a space and a voice, to say what matters to us and to our students, and to feel safe in having those conversations and being able to have a space to lead. So,
so much, Bobby, Joe, Manny, Joelle, and Sean for the presentation and letting us know what is happening in the Riel School Division in regards to Indigenous education, and as well as an insight into what is developing in the future. Which, as you saw, sometimes there's a glitch in technology, which megabytes, but fortunately we have Taylor Pen with us. Just click on the draw to fix up any glitches we have. So thank you for that, Taylor. I'd like to now welcome Michelle Jean-Paul, the Divisional Principal of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion in Anti-Racism Services, to do a presentation on diversity, equity, and inclusion in anti-racism. Michelle.
Thank you very much, Josie, and thank you everyone for attending this evening, whether you're in person or virtually. I'm going to share a little bit about the work that I've been doing, but this is part of a bigger puzzle, and really the groundwork has been laid by folks like the members of the Indigenous Education who have been working tirelessly over the last few years to push the learning that's happening in the Riel School Division around all areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and anti-racism. Because when we engage in this work, it's important to consider the place and space that we're in, and being on Indigenous lands, bringing that lens to all of the work that we do. So a big thank you to them, because the work that I've been brought in to do as of the month of January is facilitated by the work that they've already been doing. So important to acknowledge that and the connections between the work. So all of this connects back to our multi-year strategic plan and what we've said we want to accomplish as a division and who we said we are as a division. And so this strategic priority number one around creating a culture of equity and inclusion is what necessitates the work in this area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism services. But what do these things mean? So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's a variety of, if you Google them online, you'll see a variety of visuals describing these things. And so diversity is a fact in any society. People are present, they all come from different identities, different walks of lives. But equity is when we try to make sure that there's space for all of these people to be treated with a sense of belonging, which is what we're working towards. And inclusion is that notion of the actions that we're taking in order to realize these. And so if you look at the visual here, this beautiful Venn diagram, it talks about the intersection of diversity, equity, and inclusion. All of those things combined is how we can create a sense of belonging. Because again, diversity is present, but what is the work, what is the action that we're taking to ensure that those diverse people feel a sense of belonging? And that's some of the work that we're focused on in the Riel School. So what is anti-racism? This definition is taken from a document, and if you paid attention to our social media feeds recently on our Twitter feed, we shared the community document from the Indigenous Directorate of Manitoba Education around creating racism-free schools. And so anti-racism education, it's not just about what teachers are doing in classrooms. It's about looking at all of the policies, all of the practices of a school system. And so that's the importance of the approach that we're taking in the Riel School Division, that it's not just about classroom practice, but we're talking about these things at a board level, at a community level, with senior leadership, school leaders, but also engaging clerical staff, custodial staff, and other non-teaching staff in these conversations about anti-racism. And so this has been the focus of my work within the last few months in the Riel School Division, and part of this ongoing piece, challenging some of the things that impede people from finding a sense of belonging in our division. So student voice is one of the ways in which we are approaching this work. So some of the things that have taken place already, we started a divisional storytime program. So this virtual storytime occurs every Friday. Schools across the division are invited to participate. And this is an opportunity for our teacher librarians to engage and model some of the learning that can take place using brilliant and beautiful picture books. But our first guest reader, if you look at the picture being shown here, is a young gentleman. And so when we had our guest reader at the last minute cancel, he was supposed to simply be doing the introduction, and he ended up stepping in. He himself is an author and illustrator, and he managed this 30-minute session impromptu and did a brilliant, brilliant job of it. So I think echoing some of the things that my colleagues in the Indigenous Education team stated, when we get out of the way and we let students lead, beautiful things happen. We also had a number of students who helped lead our divisional assembly for March 21st, which is the United Nations International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And so we had students across a number of our schools, both early and senior years, in both the English and French immersion programs, facilitate this 30-minute virtual assembly where they taught folks from across the school division about what racism is, what anti-racism is, and what are some ways that we can address it in our school. You'll also see in this image here, we have some students who have facilitated some of the adult learning taking place. So we have students from J.H. Brens who helped facilitate some of the professional learning that our leadership, which included senior leadership and members of our trustee team as well. And so we had students, again, telling us what we need to know in terms of creating spaces of belonging for them. Who better than themselves to inform the practice of the school division? So continuing to look for ways, not just to hear students, but to authentically hear them and make sure that there are actions that are matching up with the needs that they're surfacing as part of the work that we're doing in the areas of DEI and anti-racism. Professional learning, as we've talked about, is one of those ongoing pieces. And so I had the opportunity on February 4th to provide 4 professional development sessions that reached 2,000 staff members in the Riel School Division. So this is part of the deep learning that's taking place and the conversations that we're looking to have on an ongoing basis with staff. So this is an artistic representation of the learning of one staff member within the Riel School Division. And these professional learning opportunities, again, it's not just about teachers in classroom practice, it's about reaching all levels of staff. And so one of the focuses that we've engaged in a little bit as of late, which we started with our leadership team, and we've started working with our divisional teams. So today with clinical services, tomorrow with our EAL and our learning teams, is around the notion of hospitality. So how are we creating space? How are we creating space for the families that are in our division to be able to bring their whole selves to our schools? And so this is one of the focuses of professional learning. And again, ensuring the fact that we're not just touching on these things once, but we're providing a number of access points. Some of the professional learning that's occurred has been informal as well. So a number of school leaders up invitations to discussion circles based on some of the professional reading that's provided on a bi-weekly basis in our leadership lineup. And then also Taylor and Lexi have done a fantastic job on a monthly basis. We have our learning circle, which goes out to all divisional staff. And we've been certain to include readings and some prompting questions around issues of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism in those, so that there's informal opportunities. Some of this professional learning is taking place one-on-one, where it's staff members. I just got a phone call from some secretarial staff who wanted to understand a little bit better their role and how they could work to enhance that sense of belonging. So again, the professional learning that's occurring is occurring at all levels of staff, which is really how you create that system change. So I've talked a little bit about the professional learning that's taken place, some of that focusing on non-teaching staff. There's been a couple of things specifically around leadership in the division. As mentioned, this notion of hospitality is one of the things that we're looking at. So how are we welcoming folks into our spaces? And one of the things that we are thinking about when we talk about this is when we welcome people into our homes, what does that look like? We tend to give our guests our best, and we tend to think about their needs before our own. And so how are we as a school system receiving the families in our community? And how are we ready for the guests that we don't even know are coming yet? Equity detours, this is one of the informal discussion groups. So we had school leaders across the division who chose to give of their time. We had probably about a dozen people who met at 7:30 in the morning before the school day started to engage in conversation, other folks who joined groups after school. And so we're attempting on a monthly basis with some of the professional learnings that we're providing to give space for people who need to unpack it and discuss it a little bit more. We also are, we've just launched a book study with our leadership team. The book we're going to be looking at is So You Want to Talk About Race. And again, looking at how can we increase the comfort level? How can we increase the knowledge that our school leaders have so they're able to facilitate this work and these conversations at the school level, but also within our community. Policy and governance. We have had the first reading of policy ACH, addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, which took place in December. But since December, we've been going through a consultative process to ensure that the policy that we're developing as a school division is representative of our community. And so making sure that these policies aren't being written in isolation. So the process we've looked at is we've had all of our schools go through a review process with staff so that they are informing the policy that's being created, but also in co-creating policy, it makes sure that it doesn't stay within the board office, but that the people on the ground who are responsible for making these things happen are well aware of them. We've also gone through a student feedback process with policy ACH, as well as informal community feedback. And we are, I believe it's next week, we'll be meeting with some community members out of RDC to ensure that we've got that additional community voice involved in that. We're in the process of reviewing some existing policies. So policy IJ, IJA, and IJL, which address resources and materials in the classroom. And so again, making sure that the policies that we're developing aren't in isolation. So looking at these existing policies and asking ourselves, how can we apply these equity lenses, this idea of belonging to these pre-existing policies so that equity, belonging isn't just on its own, but it's part of all of the things that we do as a school division. The third area of policy that we're looking at is we are in the process of developing an employment equity policy. And so from the ground level on this one, we've approached it from the get-go in a very different way. So we're starting with community and staff consultations and building the policy from that direction. So we recognize that as we're going through these processes, it looks a little bit different and it might take a little bit more time, but the importance of bringing voice within that process and looking at policy as living documents that reflect the changing faces of the Riel School Division. Public awareness, using our social media, using events like this town hall to share with the public the work that we're doing. We're very fortunate, I always say as educators, to be able to be on the forefront of some really great social movements in terms of the professional learning that we're able to do. And so how do we make sure that the conversations we're having with students in classrooms, in schools, permeates, and that's parents and families can support their children as they're having these conversations at home. And so using our social media is one of the ways that we're able to accomplish this. So informing the public of the conversations that we're having, hopefully inviting them into those conversations helps broaden the lens through which we're looking at things and really supports that multi-year strategic plan where we're looking at creating a culture of belonging, a culture of equity, not looking just at students, but looking at the role of staff and the role of community as well. And so those of you in attendance at our town hall get a sneak peek a little bit of a preview. We are going to be sharing with you a link to a video that we've prepared. And this video is a bit of a launch or relaunching, I would say, because the work that we've been doing around the area of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism long precedes the launching of this video and has been something that we've been working at for a number of years as a division already. But this video is kind of a relaunch, a renewing of our commitment to the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism. So we'll be sharing the link with you and launching it tomorrow on our social media accounts. And so that's it for me in terms of highlighting some of the pieces that we've been working on and the directions that we're heading in to amplify the work being done by folks like our Indigenous education team, and ensuring that this work is happening not in isolation, but in collaboration with all of the divisional teams, so that we're having as much reach across the division as possible. Thank you.
We'll send it after. Everyone will get an email to them after this presentation. You have to be patient on that one, Trustee. Thank you very much, Michelle, for your presentation. And thank you for the work you're doing to ensure that the Riel School is equitable for all. I'm proud to be a trustee in a division that embraces the work that we do, and also the Indigenous education that we're providing for students. I'd like to call upon Pam Kolachuk now. Trustee Kolachuk is going to give a presentation on the electoral ward boundary changes that we came up with for the upcoming trustee election.
So I'd have to say I have hard acts to follow. I get to talk about politics now after talking about some amazing things that have been happening in our division. I should have been first. Definitely. So I just want to make note that, ward boundaries are trustee ward boundaries related to election ward boundaries. And it is not the same as school catchments. So if anybody's on the call wanting to talk about school catchments, night is not the night. So if we look to the next election, which is actually coming up this fall, if anybody's interested, it also is a civic election for city councilors and for the mayor. The secretary treasurer, Jamie Rudnicki, and the trustees looked at, how do we realign our boundaries in order to make things more equitable for trustees. So we currently have 4 wards in our division, Ward 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we have 7 trustees. So or 9, yes, 9 trustees. Thinking of my other board, 9 trustees. And at the January 25th, we had a special board meeting in which the board approved a change in the ward boundaries. So what does this mean to you? So this is a picture of Ward 3 that everyone sees. So Ward 3 is essentially Bishop Grandin. It's your line that's here. That goes across, and the perimeter is your line at the bottom, and then your empty space is your south of the perimeter line. So in Ward 3, we currently have 3 trustees. So we have Sandy Nemeth, Josie Landry, and Neil Vadabankar. And this ward has the most amount of people per household that vote. So what we did is we looked at kind of ward and how do we realign it. And this orange space that you see at the top of the map is kind of the northeast corner of Ward 3. So kind of Bishop Grandin and the Seine River is kind of the very wiggly line that goes across. So that orange section is actually going to be moving into Ward 2. So each of the kind of looks like weird kind of outline little maps thingies, that's a polling station. So each of those polling stations, so there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them, will move into Ward 2. And Ward 2 is essentially north of Bishop Grandin and goes all the way up to Norwood. So in Ward 2, currently the trustees are Chris Sigurdsson and Robert Page. So those polling stations will now be voting on a Ward 2 trustee instead of a Ward 3 trustee. Okay. So this is Ward 1. So Ward 1 encompasses North Windsor Park, St. Boniface, and Norwood. And we're gonna be taking 2 of the polling stations that are at the south end of Norwood and move those to Ward 2 as well. So Ward 2 is actually gonna expand into 7 more polling stations than they had in the last election. And then we look at Ward 4. So I forgot to say, Ward 1, the trustees that are currently in Ward 1 are Cindy Turner and Louise Johnson. So then we move to Ward 4. So Ward 4 currently encompasses the blue portion of Windsor Park, as well as Niagara Park, all of Southdale, Southland Park, Sage Creek, Highland Lakes, Royalwood. And the trustees here are Tom Parker and myself. We have the best ward, Tom. But unfortunately, our ward continues to get larger and larger because we have Bonavista Vista growing and we have Sage Creek growing. So the blue portion that was part of Ward 4 last election, is going to be moving into Ward 1. So there's a little northwest part of Southdale there, and then Niagara Park and all of Windsor Park, everything north of Fermor will be part of Ward 1. So when you go to your polling station, if you live in one of these polling station areas, you'll be voting for a trustee in Ward 1 in those areas. So when you look at, so the city actually sent us the final map yesterday, I believe. So you can see how the outline changes. So you can see how Ward 2 now encompasses this area that used to be part of Ward 3. And then it encompasses the SVO1 and O2 that used to be part of Ward 1, which is part of Ward 2. And then it shows the change here in Ward 1 and Ward 4 on that map. Yeah, so the upcoming election is in October, and if you're interested in running as a trustee in the next school board election, I encourage you to reach out to a member that's currently a trustee, or to attend any of our board meetings that we have the first Tuesday and third Tuesday of every month, right here in this room. And you can also attend virtually if you're interested, because we hold all of our board meetings virtually. And then we also have 2 virtual webinars hosted by the Manitoba School Boards Association on Wednesday, May 4th and Wednesday, May 11th, if you're interested. And there's lots of information on the MSBA website if you're interested in running school trustee.
Thanks. I have a question. Can you clarify, like when you talk about the catchments? So we're voting for our trustee, but is that just for the schools within that catchment area? Or because we've talked about it before about the students that attend are out of a certain area. That's what I think it helps people understand.
So we have a city councilor here today. So Marcus Chambers. So when you vote for a city councilor, or you vote for a school trustee, or you vote for an MP, they're within a certain boundary of polling stations, right? So the way that Riel is split is into four wards, which have many polling stations within each. And it's not about school catchment or where your school goes, or where your child goes to school. It's about where you reside. So if you reside in south of Fermor, you're voting for a Ward 4 trustee in that area. So the ballot will have all Ward 4 trustees on it, and you would vote for the Ward 4 trustee. Now, all trustees represent Louis Riel School Division as a whole, but we don't have one whole ward where you vote for 9 people. How we've done it is we've split it up because the people that normally run in each ward normally live in the ward or have connection to the community and wards. Answer your question?
Not entirely. No, more so about like if you're talking about like a school, who's the trustees for that school? Every trustee?
Yes, every trustee.
Every trustee is this trustee for each school.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Pam, for giving us an insight of the electoral changes. And as Pam said, these are electoral boundary changes, not school changes. And as much as, I just wanted to make a comment on her comment of Ward 4 having the best ward. I think Sandy, Neil and I would that's that. But yeah, so that gives you an idea. And the reason we did change the boundaries was to make the wards more equitable. So you do elect a trustee within your ward, but we are trustees for the ward. So thank you again. We'd like to entertain more questions now, and we'll start with the people present in the building right now. If you have any questions for any presenter tonight, please feel free to ask them, and I'll call upon the presenter to answer your question for you, and then we'll move to questions from the people virtual. So are there any other questions for any presenter? Yes.
My park sent me with the, for our parent committee, equal brands, and their question was, what are some ways that the parent committees are able to support some of these really important initiatives? They were looking for just one or two kind of action pieces that we might be able to move on.
If I could ask Michelle or Bobby Joe, or both of you, if you could respond to that question.
Yes. I'm just cognizant of the fact that there are people in the ether watching as well, so I'll come to the front. In terms of what can PACs or other community members to do, I would say, you know, how can we further this learning on the community level? So if parent advisory councils want to organize, I don't want to overextend any of the folks present either, but I would say, you know, as we're looking to build capacity with other members of the division as well, like are there members within that school community who perhaps supported or directed by members of the Indigenous education team or myself could lead some parallel learning within your school community with the families attending there. And I think that would be a great action item. You know, parent advisory councils often do a great job of bringing community out in a variety of ways. So what is the learning that you can participate in so that when, you know, your children are coming home talking about the kinds of things happening in school, you can say, I learned it too, and actually you're wrong, this is what it is. So I would say that would be one concrete thing that I would suggest. And then also when we are extending invitations, and again, looking for ways of reaching the most people possible. So I would say, you know, I'm looking at something like the working group for the employment equity policy. That's a great way of parents, you know, and other community members coming and participating actively in the work that we're doing. You know, and also, you know, just ensuring that if you're someone who's connected to the things happening in the division, you know, when you're at that soccer game with the other families who might not have the same opportunity to be connected, how are you sharing the information and transmitting it so that the learning is happening at the level as well? I don't know if anyone, Bobby Joe, you want to add?
No.
Does that answer your question?
Yep, I got it.
And I think we have another question.
Good evening. My name is Jordan Bighorn and children at Frontenac and Windsor Park. It's, I guess, the same question for our Indigenous education presentation and diversity and equity. You know, I have to forgive me too. I swear I had the question in my head perfectly laid out, and now I start to think if it's going to make sense as it comes out. But with both presentations, which with such critical work on many fronts, a lot of it is, in one sense, has a view on our history, given so much of what has to be corrected and rethought, you know, was put in place by previous folks. And so the correction and the learning, et cetera, the relearning that is underway. I just wonder if there could be a comment or if there's thought to, and perhaps even as an Indigenous person myself, what it looks like when we're past it, when we're kind of at the horizon of where we're going after this. I think there's some expectation and understanding. There's the platitudes of being one human family, et cetera. But in kind of coming from the standpoint of how difficult this work can be and why folks might be resistant, or do you feel like you're losing heritage or pride if you're not teaching it a certain way? And there's a fight between what you're trying to learn in new ways, but the shared goal of where we're going to, I'm just wondering if there's thought or vision of what that looks like once you have our generations go this experience of learning things in a different way.
So, Bobby Joe or one of the team, if you'd like to
All right.
come up and address that.
Lots of thought process goes into what we're teaching and where we're going. One of the things we tell teachers is because we get caught up in what do we teach, and how do we bring ceremony in. And I think history is one of the things that you alluded to. History is an important part of what we're doing. Reimagining history and relearning history is something we're trying to give back. As far as an end goal, I think it's an ongoing process. I think community, when a community is healthy and growing together, we're learning together. And that community continues to bring in all parts of who we are as a community. And this community is broad and it's diverse. It covers a lot of geographical area, and it's also a historical area, which we touch on as well. But all those things are important to continue to bring in and important to recognize. Why this is of particular importance for us, I think as Indigenous people, first off, right? It's the world we live in, and we want it to change. As a division, I think reflecting upon some of the data and the data collection that we've done over the last few years, the data that we're our data hasn't reflected who we want to be as. And what it reflected was that there were some parts of our community that weren't achieving success levels that we were hoping for. And so moving forward, ideally, all members of our community are finding success. All members of our community are finding a voice within this community. And I think that's where we're moving to. As far as an end goal or an end date, I think it's a bit of a moving target, and it's not just the school division that approaches that. It is bringing in a pack to learn. It's pushing education outside of the four walls of whatever community or building that we're in, and encouraging that to happen, because really we're looking at systemic change. The education system is looking inwards to say, what are we doing? What does our data reflect? The healthcare system, the justice system, all of those systems at play. And when you look at the overrepresentation of Indigenous people in some of those areas, it's stark and it's shocking. And we're on the cusp of lots of people asking lots of questions. A little over a year ago, we had 215. And 215, for those of you who don't know, was one of the first residential school sites in Kamloops. It was Kamloops. It was in British Columbia. That were where they found 215 unmarked graves of students there, and it was a moment that I think not only this community but our country reflected upon that and said, what happened? And I think it was a moment for us to reflect and say there is lots of things that haven't been taught in history, and it was great for us in terms of we took our opportunity to teach some different things and to say we have some things to tell you. We have some things to tell senior leadership. We have some things to tell our leadership team. We have some things that are going to help our teachers and trickle down into our classrooms, where we begin to tell students a different story. And that story where we want to get to is we want our community, the Indigenous community, to unpack some internalized oppression, so that we don't become a self-fulfilling prophecy of stereotype. We see past some of the things that are happening in our community. We begin to tell a story that, well, we didn't get to poverty by happenstance. We didn't get to dysfunction in our communities by happenstance. There were specific things that were done. And we need to start to talk about those things as a community in order to move forward. So I hope that answers some of that question. I have a tendency to ramble on.
And I think that's a great question too. And it's, it's a $1 million question. How are you going to get there and how long is it going to take? And I think that one of the things that we really consider is in LRSD is that we have space to do it. And I have had an opportunity to work in many school divisions, and I have never been given the space. I've had to be able to have those difficult conversations and to be discomforted and to allow teachers to sit in some of that discomfort in order to do that learning. So it's very hopeful. And as we move along this journey, we keep looking at it and we keep trying and keep looking. And as we tell the history, not only is sharing the colonial history and that trauma-based history, but it's also sharing what was here first and what was in place here first, and how was that impacted by colonialism, but also how does it continue to be impacted today. So sharing our current stories and current and we're moving forward. But, you know, we just keep doing the work that we're doing, and like Manny said, that we address all levels of the systems, and we can't do this work alone or in silos. But you know, Michelle and the other teams is really important that we all work together, but also in bringing in community. And it's interesting that, you know, that was shared about PAC, because we've been talking about it for a couple of years. How do we bring some of this professional to our parents, right? So that it continues at home. So those are some of the hopes and our plans for the future. But also having open conversations too, where we are hearing from our community and we're able to, you know, reflect on some of the ask and you know, take some of that feedback and changes that are necessary to.
It's intimately important to each and every one of us that are part of this team that are here presented. We're not just employees of the division. Our children all go to school. And not only are we proud of the work that we're doing, obviously, but we're proud of the spaces that are being for our kids in school.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Manny. I hope that answers your question, and thank you for articulating it so well. I know it's hard sometimes to put in our head, hard to articulate it. That's why I carry notes. I'm always in awe of people who can do it so well, but thank you.
Thank you. This is absolutely fascinating, absolutely great work that's being done. My question is around physical education and what changes are being made to broaden or increase the sports and recreation offerings that are offered in the school system that might even align with the city of Winnipeg's plan in terms of sports and recreation offerings to keep children engaged and to keep their sports part of an inclusion strategy to make sure that they feel represented in terms of the sports recreation activities that they enjoy.
Yeah, Superintendent Michelik, would you like?
Oh, you're gonna throw that one together.
You tried to hide in the back there. But we found you.
No, I was just sitting lots. And there might be someone on the call who wants to join in.
Yeah, we have a couple, that'll.
But you know what, it's an opportunity for me to acknowledge the city and all that you've been doing to invest in our schools. People aren't aware that the Dakota Field doesn't happen without the city making a significant investment. And the Dakota Field be the most stellar, shining example of investment. But to any one of our schools, the investments you're making in the adjoining park spaces that are the responsibility of the city, and you often extend those investment property we own. Well, I think this is the key, right? The work of our teachers responsible for the healthy living curriculum, this way of talking about what traditionally would be a phys ed curriculum. It's about active lifestyles so that we flourish and thrive as individuals, as communities. And of course, sports are a way of being active, but just one of the many ways. And so what I know is that there's a greater diversity of what we mean by sports today than there was when I was a teacher, than there was when I was a student. And again, that happens because of this amazing community I'm a part of, the passions our teachers bring to it all. And again, for all of it to be all that it can, it requires a community. We can't go it alone. And this room, physically and virtually, is a beautiful example this evening of what I think of when I think of LRSD. I think of everyone that is is a part of what makes LRSD. Students, future students, children, families, parents, guardians, community members, all levels of government, and staff. We're all in it together. I don't know if this helps answer your question about what you were looking for in terms of sport.
Yeah,
and,
just a broadening of opportunities.
and you know, connecting it to our DEI initiative, of course, is that again, if we're not paying attention to who is our community in all its diversity, in all that is on offer to make for a rich, thriving, lived experience in schools, well, we see obstacles if we're not paying attention. We see prejudice, see missed opportunities, and this is what we're addressing. So specific to sports, the same questions related to taking an anti-racist stance, to acknowledging the prejudices is happening. Thank you. Is that helping to answer the question? Thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent Michelin. And thank you, Councillor Chambers. And so if we're okay in the room, we'll move on to some questions from our virtual audience.
Sure. Pardon me. So this question comes from Karen Denise Starr, and it is the anti-racism and equity work underway leading to changes in neoliberal education outcomes, so exams, grading, etc.? Is there a vision for how changes could then be linked to entry requirements at post-secondary institutions?
I'm not, who would be able to take that one? How would you make?
You want a tag team?
Let's get into neoliberalism. So thank you for that question. To clarify for folks too, when we're talking about neoliberalism, we're talking a little bit about those ideas of privatization, capitalism in education. And so I think there is a very direct tie to equity work when we're looking at that. And so, you know, I would say as we look at the various levels of the school division and the way that we're engaging in conversation about equity, we do need to be mindful of what are the public-private partnerships that we're engaging in, how do they support that work, and how do they align with our priorities as a division. In terms of looking at practice, teaching practice, assessment is part of teaching practice. So looking at things at the school level, like exams and the types of assessments that we're doing needs to be part of that conversation. As a division, I know our response to the province in terms of some of the province's ideas around assessment highlight the work and the learning that we are doing around equity. So looking at what is the role of diagnostic screening, of benchmark assessments, of standardized assessments that the government might be wanting to implement. And so then also what is our role as a school division in terms of mobilizing the public so that they're understanding these things and the impact that they have on education and the impact that they have on our students, and mobilizing the public to communicate with their voted in officers. So looking at that simultaneous work that our Board of Trustees do in terms of communicating our stance as a division, in terms of our beliefs around kids, our beliefs around education, and ensuring that the elected officials who are making these decisions at a provincial level are hearing the voices of our community members and concerns in terms of ways that some of these might enforce inequities as opposed to support some of our students that are oftentimes left behind by our school system. Tag.
All right. Well, let's ask the person who asked the question if that was enough, or do I need to go on?
No response.
Thank you.
I'll let you know.
Think you're satisfied or?
We do have somebody who would like to, I think, voice their question. Irene is on the call here. Oh, I actually just asked her on you there. Lost.
I'm gonna step away, just not to assume that.
Yeah,
I need
so
to
we'll,
say
we'll,
this
we'll
one.
have, we'll have Irene, and Irene, if you want to put your video on as well, you're welcome to. I will, ask you.
Thank you. And thank you for the presentations on Indigenous education and EDI. In relation to, oh, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
In relation to the EDI focus and these new initiatives, as many scholars in this area have pointed out and continue to point out, EDI, equity, diversity, inclusion policies are only as good as their implementation and can even be used to actually stall progress when staff can simply point to a policy instead of actually enacting it. And I think that Michelle was kind of touching on this, and I appreciate her taking the time to point out that this has to do with the entire structure of the education system, not just what happens in classrooms. She mentioned that the division's recent amplification of the UN's International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. And indeed, in terms of equity, the UN has stated that Indigenous people are at disproportionate risk in public health emergencies such as the current pandemic. So masking, as we all know, is therefore also an equity issue, not just for Indigenous groups, but for all marginalized groups of different kinds. So first of all, I'd like to know why masking has not been reinstated in Louis Riel School Division. And then the other branch to that question would be more broadly to Michelle and the members of the Indigenous education team. How do we ensure that some of the most resistant elements, which unfortunately are often, majority white boards of trustees, senior administrations, principals, are actually held to account when it comes to enacting these policies and their implementation?
I think Superintendent Mishluck, if you'd like to address the
Oh, I
start.
can take the first one, yeah. And Irene was asking my teachers
Yes.
how they hold me to account. And they'll share a bit of that, I hope. Okay, so with respect to the masks, Irene, we've had ongoing communications. And I am having ongoing dialogue with the community I serve. And Louise and Sandy can attest to this because I copied them on the email. So I emailed all the principals, vice principals in the schools this afternoon, asking to check in at the staff meeting today. It was staff meeting day, Tuesday. Asking them to check in with staff about mask usage, about the ever evolving way we are together in schools in relationship to the pandemic, and to ask, how is it all going? And to report back to me, to email me before Friday morning so that I could have all 40 emails taken in so that I could have a conversation with our union groups, that I'm also actively engaged in dialogue about this very thing, about keeping people safe, everyone's wellness, and how it is all going in this ever evolving lived experience of navigating a pandemic. I check in daily on the data we share. So we share information and we update it every day about how people are doing relative to the pandemic, relative to the virus. It's self-reported information. So I acknowledge the information is only as good as everyone taking it seriously and making the effort to report. But I've got to say, what I don't want to be misread is that people are are taking this seriously and are reporting how things are going, parents and staff. And what I'm seeing is a trend relative to the rest of the year that tells me we're navigating the pandemic and we're doing okay, given the perspective of an entire year of data that everyone can see today and in the last few days. And so when I integrate all of that information, checking in, it's to ask myself that question. Should we be, despite others, despite government, despite public health, reinstate a mask ban? Go stronger than what we've said. We've said in the absence of a public health order that can enforce a mandate. Because I've got to say, I wonder how it plays out in a school division, the one school division that says they are mandating masks. What the true lived experience of that is, absent a public health order. I don't know. But right now, we're saying absent a public health order, we are strongly recommending mask usage. I'm checking in to see how that's being lived for everyone. And if the data we're collecting in all shapes and forms, it's what people are telling me, but it's also what people are reporting relative to absences and illness. If we see a concerning trend, we might at some point before public health implement a mandate. It's the best I can do. It's a lot of what you've heard me say before, and what it is. Now, let's all get on to the other question, which is how am I held to account as the superintendent and CEO?
I can only speak on behalf of the Indigenous Education team, how we hold Mr. Schillick to account and how he has allowed us to say the things that we need to say. Last year, we had many conversations about the data collection and how Indigenous students were doing in LRSD. And through those conversations, one of the things I was brought up was, if we're going to really affect change in this division, then we really need to start at the top. That means that we need to be able to educate senior leadership, anybody in a leadership position in the entire school division. And Mr. Schillick gave us the space this year. Our entire classroom is senior leadership, and all leaders. And we meet with them once a month and we provide professional learning for them. Oftentimes it's very discomforting learning, but they've been able to sit in that space. So anytime there's an issue or there's something we need to talk about with Mr. Schillick, he often creates that space he always creates that space to give us an opportunity to share what we need to share. And that's something that doesn't happen in many school divisions. So I feel for our team, we feel that we have not only the space, but feel that we trust our senior leadership team in listening to us and making the changes that are necessary, even if they are discomforting. Hope that answers the question.
Yeah, I would just build on that to respond to that second half of your question, Irene. And I say some of this has been evidenced in terms of the way that we've changed our approach to policy development, for instance. So that to me is a very clear example of how there's been a practice based on our commitment to equity and the voices that we're bringing in as a division. So not writing it in a silo, not writing it based on the board office. Policy ACH had passed its first reading and we slowed down the process and we changed the way that the subsequent policy is being developed as a result of the learning that we're doing in the division. And so written into that policy, our intention is to have, these measures to go back and change. And the hope is the more that we learn and grow as a division, that we'll look back on this policy ACH in 2 years and say, my goodness, that was a terrible policy. We could do so much better now. So I think that's just one concrete example for me of the way that we've actualized, you know, this, I guess, measure of accountability in terms of shifting and creating for diverse voices. And I hope that there continues to be, and I trust that there will continue concrete examples such as that. More qualitative data for me would be the types of conversations that I'm being invited in. You know, you didn't just refer Christia, you referred to school principals, you know, and leadership generally speaking in the school division. And so I think that the honest conversations that I'm being invited to, or that people are attending to at the school leadership level, evidence that for me. The humility and vulnerability of some of our school leaders and talking about, I don't know what I don't know, so can you help point me in the right direction? You know, people looking specific to their school planning process. You know, what are the things we need to change? Seasoned school leaders who have invited me in to co-facilitate conversations, difficult conversations with community, difficult conversations with staff. So I sense an openness in terms of the invitations that I'm receiving to come into schools and to work with staff, to come into offices and work with school leaders, and to disrupt the way that they've done things so that they can go about it in more equitable ways. So anecdotally, I can give a number of examples in the 3.5, almost 4 months that I've been in this division of how I'm seeing that occur. And eventually the hope is that I work myself out of a job.
Another question from the chat. No, sure.
So I just wanted to thank Patricia, Bobby Joe, and Michelle for answering that question, and don't wish you would have a job. And then another question.
Yeah.
Oh, and thank you, Irene.
This individual is asking, will there be programming addressing anti-Asian racism specifically?
We'll just get you a chair.
In terms of programming, nothing specific planned at this point in time. There have been resources that have been shared with schools. With the Learning Circle, we've been assembling a bulletin board internally with documents. Our hope is to mirror that with an external website so that community and also educators around the world can access it. So one of the things that we've shared in some of the professional learning sessions that we've done, and it was one of the things that that February 4th date that touched about 2,000 people in the various sessions. There was a document by the Toronto District School Board that specifically addresses anti-Asian racism. And so that's a document that has been shared with schools. I shared it specifically when I worked in schools. And so I know that there are educators that are digging into it and looking at ways of incorporating that thinking in their schools. In terms of an overall strategy, there's not something presently, but it is something, and there are resources that have been made available to schools already at this point in time. And that, if you haven't looked at it, that's something that we can share on our social media as well. But it's a fantastic document that provides resources, helps frame conversations. And as I mentioned, a number of the schools that I've worked in, I know that there are educators who looked at that document and looked at ways of incorporating that learning immediately into their practice.
Thank you. So I think Taylor has said that at the end of our questions. I'm pretty sure, yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for those who asked the questions. We hope that we have answered them. Well, not me, but everybody else has answered them adequately for you. I'd just like to call upon our superintendent, Christia Mitchell, to provide some closing remarks.
You got it. Now I can't help but say, maybe I want to say something about neoliberalism. Okay, so neoliberalism, as I understand it, we're a public school system. And again, neoliberalism means so many things to so many people. But what it means to me is what we've seen in terms of a movement in different parts of the world. This idea that we would be better off as a society if there was less of a public sector, more of a private sector. No matter what sectors we're talking about. So that would include the public education sector, the education sector. The idea that if only public schools were more like private schools, everything would be so much better. And so we could go on and on, lots of economists and philosophers with all kinds of reasons for believing this. And well, I think the pandemic has demonstrated that to those who believe we could do away with a public sector, that's problematic. And the truth is, in Manitoba, we have a history that's such that we rely on public education. The vast majority of Manitobans are in public schools. And I believe in public schools. And I think everyone in this room, everyone here virtually believes in public schools. So if neoliberalism means let's doubt the public school system, let's introduce privatization of public school systems, I don't think it's on. And how does it connect to assessment? Well, there's an industry, a private industry, internationally, that makes billions, fooling us into believing that we need them to tell us how to test, how to assess. And again, we have these funky notions about how to know how we're doing. And they've taken the shape of all with good intent, but the OECD developing PISA, an international assessment. And it's not been around that long. It wasn't around when I went to school as a student, and it wasn't around when I taught. It only arrived on the scene when I became a principal and have been in leadership ever since. And I think the intents were good, but initially, but I'm not so sure in the end. So I guess at the end of the day, it's for whom is assessment serving an agenda? Ultimately, for me as a teacher, a principal, a superintendent, assessment for me needs to serve children, students, children and young people, first and foremost, needs to serve their teachers on that journey of learning, needs to serve their parents on that journey of learning. And standards tests, store-bought tests don't do that very well. Provincially imposed tests for grade 12 in a certain subject, or grade 10, don't serve that purpose very well. They serve a political purpose. The need for politicians to hold themselves to account. And now what I'm not saying is that politicians don't need to hold themselves to account. I'm trying to sell those who serve political masters, like me. I serve political masters, and deputy ministers and others serve political masters. I'm trying to convince them what we don't need in Manitoba is another standards test in grades 3, 6, 10 to understand how we're doing. We need to look at all the data we already collect for the most important of purposes, students, parents, and teachers, and make sense of that data. Talk about that data, make it valid more than it already is, reliable more than it already is, and speak to everyone, the diversity of students in our schools, the diversity of families, ensuring no one is lost, everyone is valued, everyone is on a journey to thrive and flourish. This is what we need, more than a standards test. It's 6 or 10, paying some company to write it. Neoliberalism. Okay, so I couldn't help myself. But how I want to end this evening is, hey, you got to hang out with my teachers this evening. Michelle, Manny, Bobby Joe, Sean, Joette. These are my teachers. I'm the chief learning officer. This is what I want. This, you know, sounds silly, right? Hope. What's the good word? Trite. I don't. You know. It sounds really chief officer, but no, really. Back to the questions Irene asked and others asked about. So how's this going to get real? Just all talk, more talk. Well, I think it gets real when folks like me who have all kinds of privilege, and I often ask myself, is it at all any of it deserved, are humble and vulnerable and understand that let go of their positionality, let go of their privilege, see themselves as needing to learn. You've got to hang out with my teacher. And if we're going to see a vision come to fruition, well, all of you in this room need to get to know my teachers. Need to learn alongside me. And you need to become my teachers. And we all need to learn and teach together. And build this journey together. So my answer to the question, what's the vision, what's the journey? It's, well, we're going to figure that out together. And as excited as I was about how we crafted this multi-year strategic plan we've alluded to back in 2017, and how engaging it was a process, it was only so much engaging, right? I was in classroom asking kids about it. I was in classrooms asking teachers about it, and trustees were there along with me, and but we can make it so much more. We need all of us, parents, students, teachers, to build this next iteration of the multi-year plan, saying, what's the vision? And then we need to hold ourselves to account. So just because I don't believe in standards tests doesn't mean I don't believe in data. We need data. We need to hold us, and we need to be vulnerable and honest about it. And we need to say, we're here, but we need to be over there. And lots of different data. And the most powerful data I've learned about this year are these amazing teachers that aren't with us this evening. Students who've been telling me how they're doing and telling me what's working, but also what's not working and what needs to change. And so thanks for joining us this evening, and hopefully you've gotten excited and inspired about the work, and are going to be along with me learning from our teachers. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent Michelin, and we have bestowed a new title. We have CLO next. To all who are attending virtually and in person, to all presenters, I'd like to thank you very much for the work that you've done. Thank you, merci, miigwech. And we're at the close of our evening now, so good night to everyone and a pleasant evening. Keep well.